A fire destroying this Queen's Church. I'm Emily Druby, and coming up, the story of how the parish is vowing to rebuild.
Married Catholic priests are a possibility according to a new Vatican document out today. There are conditions, and we'll tell you what they are. Rent regulations are changing in New York, but some are calling the new rules just a Band-Aid. Plus, it's Catholic Schools Night in Coney Island. The scholars are taking on the collars in a game that promotes Catholic education in the Brooklyn Diocese. The news starts right now.
You know, no matter what, God is still with us.
Parishioners are vowing tonight that with God on their side, their church will survive after a devastating fire. Good evening, I'm Michelle Powers. The congregation at Saint Pius the Tenth is pledging that their religious home will be rebuilt. A massive blaze Sunday evening gutted the inside of the church in Rosedale, Queens. Currents News' Emily Druby reports the latest from the scene of the tragedy. Emily.
Michelle, it's a tough day here in Rosedale. This church is beloved in the area. Heartbroken parishioners have been stopping by all day to see the damage.
I feel lost. No, but this is like a home.
Genevieve Shane watched Saint Pius X, her church for over 25 years, burn.
I was taking a nap when my neighbor woke me up and said, Jenny, your church is burning. And I'm like, are you kidding? I didn't know what to do.
The two-alarm fire ripping through this Rosedale Queens staple early Sunday evening. No injuries, but the damage is extensive. Burnt pieces of the ceiling litter the floor, the heat twisting windows and melting offering candles.
It's really sad for me.
Parishioner Fiano Jackman described the damage as difficult to see.
It became a part of my life, my daily life. I come here every day.
Parishioners are vowing to rebuild, and they're not letting the fire damage their faith. Less than 24 hours after the blaze, morning mass was held in the rectory's basement, celebrated by the church's pastor, Father Jean-Miguel Auguste.
We are church. We're going to stick together, we're going to pray together, and we're going to make it.
Father Auguste was coming back from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land with over 50 parishioners when he heard about the fire.
Somebody sent me a text telling me that your church was on fire this afternoon. And I started to pray.
His focus is now on continuing to offer services for his parishioners, getting help from other priests in the diocese to make that happen.
They came to cry with me. They came to cheer me up. They came to support me.
Some even bringing over items to ensure Father Auguste is able to continue to celebrate Mass. Father Auguste says they will rebuild and they will stay strong. But right now they're not sure if the building can be salvaged or if it needs to be knocked down and built from scratch. Right now the plan is to celebrate weekday Mass in the rectory's basement and to celebrate weekend Mass in the basement of the school across the street. In Rosedale, Emily Druby, Currents News.
For the latest on the rebuilding of Saint Pius X Church, head over to the Tablets website. At thetablet.org, you can read about how parishioners are picking up the pieces and making plans to restore their beloved church after the devastating fire. Priests in robes and hard hats also returned this weekend to worship at one of the world's most famous cathedrals, Notre Dame. With debris still scattered around, the Archbishop of Paris celebrated the first Mass in the center of the city since the devastating fire in April. The Mass, limited to 30 people for security reasons, took place in a small chapel but was broadcast live to Catholics around the world. Notre Dame's reconstruction is underway, but the church remains closed to the general public. Officials note that some structures are fragile and could still collapse. Also wearing a hard hat, Pope Francis visiting the earthquake zone in central Italy this weekend, where he called for more assistance for the people. At the Cathedral of Camerino, the Holy Father placed flowers at the remains of a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The region was rocked by two killer quakes in 2016. The Pope also spent time with the families in the city. Francis greeted other residents and assured them that he would not forget to pray for them. Back at the Vatican, a new document out today says the church must find ways to reach indigenous Catholics in the most remote parts of the Amazon, and that may include ordaining married men. Melissa Butts has more from St. Peter's Square.
Today, the Vatican historically announced a new theme that will be discussed in the October Synod on the Amazon, the idea of married men as priests, but only in the most remote areas. The Vatican presented the working document for the Synod on Panama. It's the basic text for conversations bishops in the area will have with the Pope in October. It is entitled Amazon, New Paths for the Church and for an Integral Ecology, and one of the novelties is this proposal. Affirming that celibacy is a gift for the Church, it's requested that for the most remote areas of the region, the possibility of priestly ordination be studied for elderly people, preferably indigenous, who are respected and accepted by their community, even if they already have a constituted and stable family. The purpose is to ensure the sacraments that accompany and sustain the Christian life. This refers to the so-called viri probati, old men of proven faith from small Catholic communities in areas where there are no priests for long periods of time. When he returned from Panama, the Pope already spoke about celibacy and opened the door to this possibility.
Mi viene alla mente una frase di San Paolo VI. Preferisco dare la vita prima di cambiare la legge del celibato. Rimarrebbe qualche possibilità nei posti lontanissimi, penso all'isola del Pacifico.
The Synod will begin in October and will gather 100 bishops from the area and from other places involved in caring for the Amazon, the lung of the world. Additionally, the document talks about protecting the environment, indigenous people's lifestyles, and safety to create a church in these parts with an Amazonian face. At the Vatican, Melissa Butts, Currents News.
As tensions flare across the Middle East, the Holy Father is closely following the escalations in the Gulf of Oman. After the attacks on 2 oil tankers off the coast of Iran, Pope Francis is inviting political leaders to use the instruments of diplomacy to resolve conflicts in the region. He asks that every possible effort is made to secure dialogue and peace. In Washington, lawmakers are not ruling out using military force against Iran.
Unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
There's no question that Iran is behind the attacks. I think the evidence is very strong and compelling.
This morning, Iran declared it intends to boost its uranium stockpile, the key component for nuclear weapons. In Hong Kong, tensions are still high tonight after an estimated 2 million people flooded the streets this weekend for anti-China protests. They're condemning the possibility of Beijing could extradite people in the territory back to the mainland. Today, Hong Kong's Cardinal John Tong said he is praying for a peaceful end to the crisis. The Vatican is confirming that the Holy See took part in meetings to resolve the current humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. The dialogue took place in Sweden last week. Neither the Vatican nor the Swedish government has given any further information on the talks. Power is being restored to millions of people in South America tonight after a massive blackout left several countries in total darkness. Authorities across Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, however, are still largely in the dark about what caused the collapse of the interconnected grid. The lights went out just as people in Argentina were preparing to go to the polls. Officials do not believe a cyber attack was the cause. The lights are on and the stars are shining in Coney Island. It's Catholic Schools Night at MCU Park. Currents News' Tim Harfman reports that it's a big event for Catholic education in the Brooklyn Diocese. Tim.
Michelle, before the Brooklyn Cyclones hit the diamond for their game, bragging rights are on the line between the priests and the teachers. It's the collars against the scholars. Their softball game is just part of the festivities, highlighting excellence in Catholic education. It's a highly anticipated rematch on Catholic Schools Night, the second annual Collars vs. Scholars game. I caught up with the reigning MVP earlier today. Sister Shirley Tremont from St. Bernadette Catholic Academy in Dyker Heights, Brooklyn, is playing for the Scholars.
I think it's going to be an intense game with more offense this year.
The hard-swinging sister delivered last year with 2 hits, driving in 2 runs. With the collars squeezed out a victory, winning 5-3. Now Sister Shirley is ready for revenge.
We got a slow start last year, but we've sized up the competition now a little better.
All joking aside, the focus of the night is Catholic education and the students. Nearly 50 valedictorians and salutatorians from Catholic academies across Brooklyn and Queens are being honored for their academic excellence. Sister Shirley says the faith-based education is vital for children.
Catholic education is the bedrock of our future of the church. This is the kids that get to really know and live out, hopefully day by day, the Catholic faith, a life of prayer, and come to know Jesus Christ. There's nothing more important than that.
A message to live by before Sister Shirley takes the field against the priests. This year, she's keeping her pre-game trash talking to a minimum.
Just good luck.
And I'll have a full report on the game and the ceremony tomorrow night. In Coney Island, Tim Harfman, Currents News. Michelle, back to you.
Tim, what else is happening on the field to celebrate Catholic education over there?
Well, fans with a special ticket are actually receiving this Sister Shirley bobblehead that has the scholar's hat on. Sister Shirley said that her students love it, and having her own bobblehead is something that she can check off her bucket list. Michelle.
Oh, thank you, Tim. I'm going to need one of those. There's a lot more news headed your way. New York's rent regulations are changing, but a larger crisis still looms. The city is taking steps that will add to New York's reputation as America's abortion capital. I'll talk with an activist who's against rape and incest exemptions in pro-life laws, something she has firsthand experience with. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. New regulations governing rent in New York are now law. Tenants are applauding the rules, but many landlords are not. Some housing experts are pointing out that the root causes of the city's affordable housing troubles remain. Currents News' Tamara Lane reports.
A victory for housing advocates in New York. Governor Andrew Cuomo signing landmark legislation after lawmakers passed a robust rent reform package Friday. A historic moment for the 2.4 million New York City tenants living in rent-regulated housing. New York City tenant struggles have long been a part of the city's ethos. As renters are pitted against landlords, endure steep rent hikes, maintenance problems, gentrification, and low vacancy rates. Our Lady of the Presentation's pastor, Father Edward Mason, says this issue particularly affects residents in Brooklyn.
The bottom line is it gives our people a whole lot more security and stability in their homes.
Social justice issues and accessible housing have long been at the heart of Father Mason's mission. For decades, he has been on the front lines of the fight for tenants' rights.
This is an important step in trying to stop the bleeding. That's the first step I believe in doing. The next step is now to provide for the families that have already been affected by the housing crisis.
Yet the laws may not go far enough to solve New York City's housing crisis.
Over 50% of renters are either rent burdened, paying 30% or more of income, or severely rent burdened, paying 50% or more of their gross income towards rent.
Charles McNally from NYU's Furman Center says many New Yorkers are still paying too much of their monthly income on rent.
What these bills don't tackle is the housing shortage, right? We talked a little bit about rent burdens, but a lack of supply is at the root of these problems. So the legislation is really treating symptoms. There's also some concern that the reforms in this rent bill might further constrain the housing supply.
For months, housing advocates have organized, protested, and even been arrested battling for tenant protections. A fight Emily Rodriguez knows firsthand.
Well, we live in a rent-stabilized home, but there's always like the scary feeling of what if they raise our rent too high, then what will happen, especially with my dad losing his business. We have to hope that everything stays stabilized for us.
A youth organizer for Churches United for Fair Housing, we joined her for a walk around her neighborhood. Gentrification, a common concern for many longtime residents.
Gentrification is like the big picture, because even though on the outside it looks like they're putting up nice buildings in our neighborhood, at the end of the day it's not really for us. Even though we've lived here for years and nobody made anything new for us, we were just left to basically rot.
We finally arrive at our last stop on the neighborhood tour, her family's dry cleaning business in the shadow of the M train, which will soon be lost.
So basically, my father has owned this business for 25 years in Myrtle Broadway, and he's basically they're not giving him his lease anymore to continue having this business here.
Now her family is being forced out.
Gentrification and rent, not stable rent laws allow things like this to happen. Since this neighborhood is gentrifying rapidly, it's easy for them to just take down family businesses that have been here for decades.
Experts who study the housing crisis say this legislation is a Band-Aid, not a cure.
And as long as that demand is there and we're not building enough housing to keep up with it, you're going to have a crisis of costs.
From Albany to the 5 boroughs, tenants are celebrating a victory towards better tenant protections. But with the ink not yet dry on the new rent reform legislation, concerns still loom over many city renters. Tamara Lane, Currents News.
The city council is funneling taxpayer dollars to pay for abortions. Clinics will be getting $250,000 from the city to fund the deadly procedure for low-income women. The allocation is part of New York's new budget. The city is considered the abortion capital of the country. In contrast, other states are enacting measures that protect babies. A big part of the debate over those laws is whether exceptions should be made in cases of rape and incest. Pro-life activist Rebecca Kiesling is keenly involved with those issues. She joins us now from Detroit. Rebecca, you were conceived after your biological mother was raped. She intended to get an abortion, but the deadly procedure was illegal. Now you're the leader of Save the One, a pro-life advocacy group. What is your mission, Rebecca?
Our mission is to change hearts and minds on this issue through our personal stories. So we specialize in defending all of the so-called hard cases in the abortion debate, not just the issue of rape and incest, but also poor prenatal diagnosis, fetal abnormalities.
The first time you met your biological mother was when you were 19. What's your relationship like with her today?
Well, actually, she and her husband legally adopted me 8 years ago. We have a very close mother-daughter relationship. She was pro-choice for 25 years, for 6 years after we met, and then she changed her mind. And now, decades later, we are both so thankful that we were both protected when she sought to abort me.
And now you firmly believe that abortion exceptions for rape and incest dehumanize people like you. How do you persuade people who call for those provisions in pro-life legislation?
We have a 5-state study that shows that it's really easy to change the hearts of those who are 99% pro-life, but they make the exceptions. And when you put a face to the issue, it changes hearts. And also we appeal to the sense of justice. Because in a civilized society, you do not punish innocent people for someone else's crime. And people relate to that. They understand that. Our study shows that messaging is very effective.
Another question, Rebecca. The pro-life grassroots movement is growing around the nation. How do you see the future unfolding in the fight for the sanctity of life?
Well, I'm really excited about what's been happening now. I'm going to turn 50 next month, and I honestly cannot believe it's taken this long. I'm frustrated that we've dabbled in mediocrity for so many decades. So I'm excited that things are finally beginning to come to a head where hopefully we can have a straight-up Supreme Court challenge, and let's see where all of the justices stand. And if they're not inclined to overturn Roe v. Wade, then we can have more accountability for our Republican presidents to make sure that we are getting justices appointed who will overturn Roe v. Wade. So we need to get this right, and I hope we're going to be on the right track now.
All right, Rebecca, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pro-lifers in New York making a big demonstration for the sanctity and dignity of human life in the womb.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners.
They're the Life Runners praying outside a Planned Parenthood clinic in the East Village after making their way across the Brooklyn Bridge. On the 4th of July, the group will kick off a national relay for life. Still to come on Current News.
It's a great day that I got the 75. I appreciate that very much.
The celebration of the bishop's birthday is also an important moment in the life of the Diocese of Brooklyn. We'll explain. And the tablet has a brand new page called Our Diocesan Family, where you can share your pictures of recent baptisms, Holy Communions, confirmations, marriage, all of the joyous sacraments. For more details and to submit your photos, go to thetablet.org/Our Diocesan Family. Your picture may be published in an upcoming issue of the newspaper. We'll be right back. It's the day after Bishop DiMarzio's 75th birthday, and the year ahead is shaping up as a very busy one for him and the Brooklyn Diocese. Current News' Tim Harfman reports on the bishop's plans for what's coming next and the joyous celebration of his milestone day.
A special birthday celebration for Brooklyn Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio, turning 75 years old Sunday.
It's a great day that I got the 75. I appreciate that very much, and I'm trying to enjoy it today.
The shepherd enjoying it with members of his flock at St. Athanasius Church in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Students from the parish's Catholic Academy and Religious Education program presenting Bishop DiMarzio with flowers and a cake. Annalisa Conti and Angelina Simonetti among those in attendance.
It was an honor that he wanted to come to our church just on his birthday, and I think the whole parish was proud to have him here.
He's a good role model for Catholics to practice faith and our beliefs.
Now that he's 75, Bishop DiMarzio must submit his letter of resignation to the Vatican, a requirement all bishops must follow when they reach the milestone age. It is then up to the Holy Father to accept the resignation and appoint a successor.
Normally it's a process of 6 months to a year when they find somebody to take your place, and then once it's announced, then you become the apostolic administrator until the new bishop is placed in.
Who the Pope will pick and when exactly that will be is unclear. Monsignor David Casado, pastor of St. Athanasius Church, says Bishop DiMarzio has made a lasting impression on the diocese over the past 15 years.
He has made a tremendous impact on this diocese. He has a great administrative skill, but more than that, he has a tremendous pastoral skill, and he's able to reach out language-wise, all sorts of things that he can do for God's people here in Brooklyn and Queens.
A native of Newark, New Jersey, he was the Bishop of Camden, New Jersey, before becoming the 7th Bishop of Brooklyn in 2003. Bishop DiMarzio has been a champion for immigrants' rights, vocations, and Catholic education. But he says what he's most proud of, strengthening relationships with Christ.
I think basically trying to make the diocese one of evangelization, of trying to reach out to people who are not coming to church, reach out to those who are not Catholics. That was my beginning sermon when I took over the diocese, and I continue that.
Continuing that at the age of 75 and beyond. In Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Tim Harfman, Current News.
That is Current News. I'm Michelle Powers. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.